Thank you very much, Manning. And we have a great program today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a very special and timely meeting with Mara Rudman and Dan Shapiro, two distinguished figures on the American scene. Our speakers are seasoned experts of U.S. policy in the Middle East who have both served in the White House under former U.S. President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden. Today, our panelists will share their insights on the U.S. presidential election, where the former vice president has won the race, and what the implications of these results could be for the Middle East and U.S. policy toward the region. This special opportunity to have our distinguished speakers with us is a consequence of the efforts of Jim Pickup and Jay Footlick, who are with us and will be doing a program of their own in January. Jim and Jay are good friends of CMED and have been active in the Washington foreign policy and legal arenas for decades. They have been very instrumental in coordinating our program today. Of course, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the UCLA International Institute, the UCLA Center for International Relations, and the Luskin Department of Public Policy. Thank you all very much. And we are delighted that so many of you have chosen to join us from around the world. Allow me to introduce our speakers. Mara Rudman, who is the Executive Vice President for Policy at the Center for American Progress, a public policy research institute in Washington, D.C. She served the presidential administrations of both Obama and Clinton as Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs at various points, and has held many other illustrious government appointments, including Deputy Envoy and Chief of Staff to the Special Envoy for Middle East Peace in the U.S. State Department and Assistant Administrator for the Middle East at USAID. She's also a faculty fellow at Georgetown University and a Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. She has authored various publications and is a frequent guest on TV and radio. Next, we have Ambassador Dan Shapiro, a distinguished visiting fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv from 2011 to 2017, where he served as U.S. Ambassador to Israel in the Obama administration. Previously, he was Senior Director for the Middle East and North Africa on the White House National Security Staff, where he advised President Obama and Vice President Biden on all aspects of U.S. policy in the region. Throughout his career, Ambassador Shapiro has contributed to numerous congressional efforts to support negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, to increase U.S. security assistance to Israel, and to strengthen sanctions and other measures against Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. So now what we're going to do today is I'm going to have a little discussion with both of our speakers, be asked some questions, and then we will move on to your questions, which is the majority of the time that we'll be together. So let me ask the first question, and it's as follows. Will the world and the Middle East be better placed under President-elect Biden, and how? How do you think his foreign policy, both globally and in the Middle East, will be different from his predecessor? Either of you want to go first? You both raised your hands. So
no, we're both turning to the other.
Rudman first. So.
Oh, okay.
Or S.
Well, I think there are so many ways that that policy will be, that the United States will be better positioned going forward. Let me put it that way. You have in President-elect Biden, somebody who's obviously very familiar with the world stage, has a number of different key relationships to help, and is absolutely primed on ensuring that for the United States to be strong at home, we need to be strong in the world, and vice versa. And so that will be most easily, there are a number of significant challenges out there, and some of the ways to start working more effectively is to make sure that the United States is maximizing what we can do working with friends and allies who share our values and our interests. And I think a number of those things would indicate a change from where the current administration has been. Dan?
Sure. Thank you, Steve and CMD and everyone for joining us, and it's great to be with Mara. No, I'll obviously second the notion that our foreign policy overall is going to be a lot better under President-elect Biden's administration. What President Trump has tried to do is run a policy that he calls America First. But what it has really amounted to is, in many cases, America alone. And often America alone and screw everybody else, which is not a way to build coalitions to deal with the most pressing problems that we face. There's no foreign policy challenge or national security challenge that we face today that we can address it without partners. And we need partners, as Mara says, that share our interests and values, but also who want to be associated with our leadership. With few exceptions, you can hear the exhaling and the relief that President-elect Biden's victory is being greeted with by our traditional partners all over the world, who want to work with us, who want to follow American leadership, who want to be inspired by America's example. And have really not seen that is the America that they've had to work with. And so whether we're talking about climate change or refugees or COVID or any of the, or non-proliferation or any of the major challenges we face, we can only do that with those kinds of coalitions. We'd also have a much more predictable and stable policy that's not subject to the impulsive mood swings of the president, but rather follows a kind of regular order, and therefore allows friends and partners to adjust to it and to know what to expect. And we will have something a lot more principled, much less transactional. President Trump's idea that it's really everyone for themselves, and so if he can score a win through a financial deal or maybe a political benefit to himself, that often animates a policy decision rather than principles such as upholding our commitment to human rights, upholding our commitment to our allies' security, upholding our own democratic institutions and ideals, and letting those be the rallying sources of our leadership.
Thank you. Thank you both for opening. I'm going to go to Dan this time first. And you actually answered a couple of my questions. And so I'm going to skip down and ask the following question, which to some extent challenges what you just said. One of the reasons that many in the Middle East prefer President Trump was that he was very anti-Iran and seemed very ready to allow various countries between Saudi Arabia to Israel to do what they wanted. Whether or not that is the case, how will a Biden administration be different?
Sorry. Look, there are some countries in the region who have appreciated aspects of President Trump's Iran policy. I think we can agree that the decision to withdraw from the nuclear deal was welcomed by Israel and perhaps welcomed by some of the Gulf states. But let me say a couple of things. There's certainly nobody who works with President-elect Biden or himself or Vice President-elect Harris has any illusions about the nature of the Iranian regime, about Iran's malign intentions toward its neighbors, Israel and its Gulf state neighbors and others, or its very dangerous activities all over the region, or its pursuit of nuclear weapons and support for terrorism. Those are well understood. But the facts of what the Trump policy has wrought also have to be taken into account. Today, Iran is much closer to a nuclear weapon than it was when President Trump took office. It's from 3 to 6 months away rather than a year away. Today, Iran is more aggressive in the region, in the Gulf, in Iraq, in Syria, than it was when President Trump took office. And today, the United States is more isolated in dealing with Iran, as evidenced by the failure to extend the UN arms embargo or trigger the snapback of sanctions. So the reality is that even those countries that may have found the Trump rhetoric or the Trump impulsivity when it worked in their favor, or even certain specific decisions to be to their liking, are not actually seeing their interests, and certainly I don't think our interests, advanced as Iran gets closer to a nuclear weapon, acts more aggressively in the region, and the U.S. is more isolated. And so the opportunity here is to work with those countries. Obviously, they are friends and partners, whether or not we have agreed at all times on the approach, but on a new approach that is going to have the United States back in a leadership role of an international coalition, not just a coalition of one or two regional partners, so that it's not us trying to do everything by ourselves against Iran, which manifestly is not working in the ways that I stated, but rather takes a much more strategic approach towards achieving a long-term, stronger, broader nuclear agreement that keeps Iran at safe distance from nuclear capability for many, many years, addresses its other dangerous behaviors from ballistic missiles to terrorist sponsorship, and does so with many, many partners and allies in the region and out of the region.
Mara?
Yeah, I would just double down on everything that Dan has just said. I suspect you're not going to see a whole lot of differences between me and Dan on various things. I think we probably, for the most part, could answer the questions for each other on a number of these issues. Where I would put particular emphasis is on Dan's last point, which is that to be able to have the kind of successful strategy going forward, to be able to have an approach that is sustainable, we need to have friends and partners with us. We need to be part of the solution. We are a key part of the solution. We, the United States, and our leadership should be. And to make it sustainable, we need to have the broadest and deepest possible coalition. And that, I believe, is a significant change from the isolation that we find ourselves in right now.
All right, next question. Many Israelis believe that Trump was more accommodating to them than a Biden administration would be. Do you agree?
I'm definitely letting Dan take that first.
All right. Dan?
Okay, well, I owe you one more. I actually think it's a mixed picture. Look, everybody knows that President Trump is reasonably popular in Israel. That's not a surprise. There's a lot of appreciation for moving the embassy to Jerusalem, for recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli territory, withdrawing from the Iran deals we spoke about a moment ago, and maybe reducing pressure on aspects of the Palestinian issue, maybe including the growth of settlements. It's a mixed picture, though. This is also the same president that exposed Israeli intelligence to the Russians in the Oval Office, that has put significant pressure on Israel over its commercial relationships with China, that shocked Israelis by an overnight decision to reverse the plan to keep U.S. troops in Syria and announced they would be withdrawn after a conversation with one of Israel's regional nemesis, Erdogan. That has actually delivered much less on the Iran file in the way that I mentioned a moment ago, and that in order to secure, or in the process of securing, let's say, the normalization agreement with the UAE, raised serious questions about Israel's qualitative military edge by pledging to sell the F-35 aircraft to the United Arab Emirates. So it's a mixed picture, actually. And in addition, he has exposed Israel to other risks. Again, I mean, some Israelis see it this way, some don't. But the risk of putting a two-state solution really into the category of something that is impossible. He very nearly triggered a unilateral Israeli annexation of significant parts of the West Bank that would have been the death knell of a two-state solution. It was given an off-ramp by the UAE offer to normalize. But that really would have done Israel no favors in terms of its future as a Jewish and democratic state, and very likely its security as well. What I think Israelis will find in President-elect Biden's administration, they know him very well, is a very, very loyal and faithful friend. He's spent his entire career devoted to Israel's security, devoted to defending Israel's legitimacy anywhere it's challenged, devoted to expanding opportunities for peace between Israel and its neighbors. He's welcomed the normalization agreements and intends to work toward them. He's pledged very clearly that Iran will never achieve a nuclear weapon. And he will also work to keep a two-state solution alive and viable, which means some changes in the U.S. approach to the Palestinians, for sure. We can talk about that. But it also means making clear that both sides have obligations, and he wants to work with both of them so that they take actions that are helpful and constructive and don't take the actions that make it more difficult to keep two states alive and viable. I think it's a different style for sure than the Trump style, but I think Israelis will find it's the traditional American partner that they actually have known for many, many years.
Mara, do you want to get into this or go on to the next one?
No, I just have nothing to add to Dan's excellent.
All right, so then we should call on you next. At any rate, this is the last question that we prepared, and it's a little related to Dan's ending. Many praise Trump for enhancing Israel's position with several Middle East countries and fear pressure on them on behalf of Palestinians under Biden. And of course, the flip side of that, doing more for Palestinians, which may or may not be wrong, but that's how they feel. In your opinion, is this accurate that that's where the Biden administration is going to go?
I would expect the Biden administration to look at what's in United States interests and what's going to be most effective for helping the United States and stabilizing the region as well. And so in that context, I think it's fair to anticipate or look at how to better stabilize the situation with the Palestinians than where it is now, and to keep, as Dan had mentioned, keep options open for the viability of a two-state solution. And that should be part of also continuing on the positive steps in Israel's relationship with others in the region. The president-elect, I enjoy saying that, put out some specific comments at the time that each of those agreements were signed that was quite congratulatory and positive, and looked at, as I believe, looked at those as a continuum. So that I don't think, Stephen, that what you have laid out are that those are mutually exclusive. In other words, being able to continue looking for opportunities to expand Israel's relationship in the region, and frankly, further improve Israel's relationships with the rest of the world, at the same time that we also look to figure out how to get Palestinians to a better place than is the situation currently, and in doing so, help Israel at the same time, because I do not believe that, and I think many would agree that it is not in Israel's interest to have the situation as it is now, indefinitely.
Do you have any comment, Dan?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with what Mara said. I'll just add one thought, which is that the idea of, well, it's really the same thought, but I'll just say my own words. The idea of setting up normalization between Israel and Arab states and progress toward an Israeli-Palestinian conflict-ending agreement, which is a two-state solution, as somehow oppositional to one another is nonsensical. There was a sequence that was proposed by Arab states and challenged other countries to keep pace with that. That's something the United States has always, on a bipartisan way, made a strategic objective, was normalization between Israel and Arab states. He also believes and has said that it can be a source of momentum if used correctly and creatively, and with Israeli and Palestinian leaders who are able to be thoughtful about this, to generate new momentum for Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking. A country like the UAE, for example, now that it has normalized with Israel, is going to have a very different kind of dialogue with the Israeli public and the Israeli people than it ever could have as a boycotting nation. It also has resources to bring to bear to help strengthen and stabilize Palestinian institutions, and perhaps provide political support, coaching, when you can say maybe positive pressure in the right ways. It may not be with this Palestinian leadership, but perhaps a different one, that would allow them to think differently about their approach to negotiations that haven't succeeded in the past. So I don't see any reason why this is these are set off as a one or the other. It should be a both and situation, and there's real opportunities.
All right, so this is the end of our first segment. We will now turn the conversation over to our audience for the Q&A segment. We've been receiving the questions. From my count, it's 21 already that some of you are sending. And if you do not remember or joined us late, here's how to send a question for our speakers. If you are joining us via Zoom, click on the Q&A button I just mentioned at the bottom of your screen. Please provide your full name and the country you represent. And I would say to our speakers that because we have so many questions already and many more to come, I suspect, you don't both have to answer unless you want to. But of course, if you both want to answer a question, please do so. And now a little bit of a surprise, which I'm very excited about. We're going to come back to Manny Jad, our deputy director, who has been helping to build our center for over 18 years. Originally from Saudi Arabia, she has been critical to the growth and the development of the Center for Middle East Development at UCLA. Manny Jad.
Thank you, Steve. So our first question will be from Ambassador Nabil Fahmy from Egypt. He says, the United States has been in the Middle East for several generations. It has helped close conflict resolution deals, but never really initiated these processes. War and peace were essentially regional initiatives. The value of having the U.S. has been where and when it provided security assurances. Is this valid any longer? Who would like to take it first? Mara?
Sure, I'll start off here, and I'm apologizing for it's a beautiful day here in Washington, but it means the sunlight is coming in at odd angles on my face, so that's why you see me moving around a little bit. Well, it's great opportunity to be able to hear from Ambassador Fahmy. I wish we could speak directly on some of this. I have to say, I'm not sure that I agree with the assumptions built into the question. In my experience, the United States has taken a range of different roles in helping negotiations between parties or reach agreements when parties have started with various tracks, and the United States has come in. In some cases, the United States has initiated discussions and kind of broken broken set ways of thinking about how things should proceed. And in other cases, and these are not either or, to use Dan's earlier expression, they're both and. The United States has also come in with a variety of different kinds of assistance, either ourselves or also, again, working with many others to bring the full kind of range of tools that are available to the fore. Sometimes that is security assistance, sometimes it's economic assistance, sometimes it's trade relationships, and with a wide range of things in between. So I believe the United States, when we're operating at full strength, is able to make a real difference, certainly for the region and for the world. And so I wouldn't start from the place that Ambassador Fahmy did.
I'll just add that there's been a continuum actually through the Obama and the Trump administrations, and I suspect to some degree we'll see echoes of this in a Biden administration as well, of a desire to be perhaps less present in an active military sense in the region. This, I think, reflects where the American people are. Perhaps it's the bitter fruit of the Iraq War, in addition to all the losses, terrible losses we've suffered. That the American people are not eager to have major military operations in the Middle East again anytime soon. That doesn't mean a complete disappearance from the region. That doesn't mean a withdrawal of security partnerships with key partners, obviously with Israel, with Gulf states, with Egypt, with Jordan, and some others. And will continue to be a U.S. presence, a very active one. There will continue to be various supplying relationships and so forth. But it's also worth bearing in mind that continuum includes a hope that those regional partners will increasingly take on more of the burden and more of the responsibility of creating a stable region. The new relationships that are being forged can be part of that. Internal reforms and stable societies is part of that. And the United States can be a partner to countries going through those kinds of transformations, but in a way that maybe right sizes the U.S. presence and the U.S. Role in regional security and upgrades the role of the regional partner players.
Thank you both. The next question is from the same person, but one for Mara and one for Dan. Dan, the feeling it's from Bassam Barabandi from Syria. Ambassador, the feeling among Syrians is that we paid the price for the deal in 2015. How can the new administration not do the same in the coming talks with Iran?
The intention, I believe, of a Biden administration will be diplomacy to address both the Iranian nuclear program, which in some ways was when the original deal was signed and remains the gravest threat that Iran poses because of the destructive capability of nuclear weapons, and the absolute, therefore, requirement to ensure that does not occur, but also Iran's very, very dangerous regional role. And that includes its support for the Assad regime, its sponsorship of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations, its introduction of significant quantities of weapons and drones and missiles and militia into Syria, which is frequently Israel has had to strike to prevent that threat from really taking hold. And so this is going to be necessary to have a structure, a kind of a diplomatic effort that addresses both of those. It may be two separate streams in parallel. It may involve regional players for some and external actors for other parts. Certainly, it needs to take account for the terrible suffering of the Syrian people, which has gone on for a decade and even longer in some ways, but certainly the decade of civil war, and getting the United States back into the business of trying to help animate the diplomacy that could help bring stability to Syria is something else that I think we may see, because that's been very, very absent over the last several years. But there's no, again, question or disagreement about Iran's role and the responsibility it bears, and the need to ensure the U.S.-led diplomatic effort addresses both aspects, the nuclear aspect and the regional aspect.
Thank you, Dan. Mara, your question is also from Bassam, and he says, the Obama administration worked with the SDF and ignored the Arabs, which created an unstable area in northeastern Syria until today. What do we do? What do we expect from the new administration in this regard? And let me just say, I'm so sorry, there's construction going on in my building, so I'll mute as fast as possible so you don't hear any of that.
We're all dealing with with the challenges of the global situation that we're in, and hopefully we'll be on a trajectory away from that and be able to meet in person again at some point.
Inshallah.
Exactly, in 2021. So I'm gonna, again, I'm not, the premise of the question is one that I don't accept, but I would, I think kind of regardless, to me, the answer is the same, and it picks up from where Dan left off about the importance of the United States, the importance and the difference it could make for the United States to be back in the business of diplomacy, of figuring out where the options are and how to advance them. to the maximum interest of everyone involved. And I think that it's a different question, but it's a lot of the same answer that Dan just gave. So I don't want to kind of repeat overly, but again, I think it is it's the opportunity to move forward on a number of fronts, understanding that we have incredibly challenging facts on the ground everywhere in the world, including in the United States right now.
My next question is from Jassar Al-Tahat from Jordan. He asks, how do you think President Biden will tackle the Qatar Gulf crisis? And how do you think President Biden will address the expanding Russian influence in the region? Dan, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, the Qatar Gulf crisis, of course, is a situation that also cries out for U.S. diplomatic leadership. There's plenty of blame to go around on multiple sides for that crisis, which is a largely unnecessary one, which has made the region less stable and made it harder to coordinate U.S. efforts to ensure the security of our Gulf partners and to protect against Iranian aggression in the region. It serves a very little purpose. The United States has differences with actions of the Qatari government, and those require very frank and straightforward discussions about them. In this case, it probably also is an example of differences that the United States has with the Saudi government. One thing that President-elect Biden has said is that while the historic friendship between the United States and Saudi Arabia is a fact, there is a need for some reassessment of aspects of that relationship that are in part because of decisions of the Saudi leadership with respect to Yemen, with respect to Qatar, with respect to human rights at home, with respect to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. This is an example of where a United States that is willing to have friendly but frank conversations with partners, and both of them are partners. There's no question, but partners with whom we have differences, and partners that it's in our interest that they put aside their differences so that there can be better coordination toward addressing common interests. To me, that's very much in U.S. interest. By the way, just I think that very generally addresses the other question: when the United States is going to be an active diplomatic presence on those types of issues, in dealing with the Iranian crises in a cooperative, multilateral way that brings in partners, dealing with being present in the negotiations around an end to the war in Syria, that very much becomes a counter to Russian influence. We're not going to dismiss Russia entirely from the region, but more countries will be drawn toward Russian influence when they see the United States as less relevant, less present, less involved in solving the key problems of the region.
Yeah, and I would just add to that it add China too, and Russia, because when the United States has been leaving the vacuum that I would argue we have been leaving by virtually every way we've handled most ways that we've handled most things over the last few years, that cedes a great deal of ground to competitors and adversaries who pose a significant challenge globally. And so within the Middle East context as well, that is very clear. So it is both concerns about Russia and in different ways concerns about China that by our absence we've invited.
I completely agree with both of you. The next question is from Felice Dunas. She says, the current president succeeded in taking steps that no president has taken before in creating alliances between Middle East neighbors to Israel. How was that possible, and how involved was this administration in orchestrating that? Why did no one take these steps before? Why should we think President Biden would succeed in taking additional steps in bringing the Middle East together with healthy alliances as the current administration has been?
I'll start, Dan, and then because one of the things that's so interesting to me is we've talked about the steps that have been taken with countries in the region are positive. No one starts from zero. And so a number of these steps and moves have built on work that has been done by administrations going back to the first President Bush or even earlier. And very specifically, I certainly recall a lot of discussions on exactly the kinds of issues that have opened up the UAE Israel relationship during the first years of President Obama's administration. So many times it's a long haul to get to the destination. And there are a lot of different people and efforts that contribute along the way. So that would be how I would look at where we are now and where we go forward. Just as it would be unfair to say that nothing happened or nothing was done in this regard by by President Trump's administration, it's equally unfair and inaccurate to say that the preceding administrations did not have a significant role in what has brought us to this point. And so I would look at it as a baton that then President-elect Biden would pick up from here in going forward.
Dan, do you have anything to add?
I think Mara covered it.
Okay. The next question is from, let's see. From Kobe Huberman from Israel, how will the new president deal with human rights issues in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and potentially other countries? And more specifically, this has come up before in regards to MBS and CC. There's other questions that touched on this. Actually, we have 60 questions right now, so I'm trying to get through as many as possible. But go ahead, Dan.
Well, I'm I'm going to defer a lot of this one tomorrow, who I think has probably spent more time on it than I have. But I mean, look, what has very much distinguished President Trump's very transactional style and I think you can say unprincipled style of foreign policy in this regard is largely ignoring the needs and the rights of the people of Middle East partners who are non-democratic, have been partners, can continue to be partners in various ways, but have obviously not treated their own people with the kind of respect for their rights that they deserve. It's transactional. If the Saudis will buy enough weaponry or enough other American products or support oil prices at a certain level, President Trump will overlook the imprisonment of women activists for women's rights or the murder of a U.S. resident journalist. That's a decidedly transactional and decidedly unprincipled way of conducting these relationships. It also doesn't do any favors. He's called CC his favorite dictator, and rarely, if ever, raises concerns about the very oppressive policies in Egypt. And it really doesn't do these countries any favors either. All of those practices breed internally pressures and long-term instability, and as we've seen in many cases in the past, often result in great upheavals rather than gradual and orderly transitions and development toward more open societies. Mara should speak more about the kind of the Biden approach here, but it's not going to be that kind of transactional, unprincipled approach. It's going to be much more in keeping with a policy, more traditional policy that does pursue our interests, which sometimes means working with parties who are different than we are, but also upholds our values.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I would definitely put it in that context of aligning our values and our interests. And I have to say, I think this is going to start at home, start here in the United States, with how we treat our own people, with what we expect of our institutions, with the way that our institutions are expected to deliver for our people, the balance between our executive branch and our legislative branch and our courts. And I think we are in a much stronger place in what we're asking other countries to do and what our expectations are of other countries when we show that that's also how we behave at home. And so when I think of where some of the most significant changes will be with a Biden administration, that it goes to the heart of how President-elect Biden conducts himself, what his expectations, what I fully expect given everything that he said on the campaign trail and everything that he is, how he'll conduct his administration, and what the rules of the road will be for his White House. So the United States itself will be going through, I think, an important illustration of how important rights and values are for the people of the United States, and in turn, how we treat others in the world, which will then also translate into our expectations of others, so that we are consistent in what we're saying and doing. But as Dan said, aligning our interests and our values in doing so.
Thank you. Our next question is from Gershon Baskin from Israel. Do you think Biden could open some kind of secret back channel track to engage Hamas in the way that Obama did with Iran? Who would like to take that one first?
I wouldn't. I don't know what a Biden administration would or wouldn't do. And so to me, that is hypothetical beyond anything that at least I would be comfortable in engaging in.
Fair enough.
Same.
Dan?
No history anyway that suggests any change of the understanding of Hamas and their U.S. laws that are relevant about contact with foreign terrorist organizations. So I'm not speculating like Mara's not, but it doesn't seem like something one would assume would happen.
Our next question is from Muhammad Abu Sada, Palestine. What will happen to the Trump deal of the century, mainly the annexation of parts of the West Bank? Will President-elect Biden dump it, or will there be a reference to it in future Palestinian-Israeli negotiations? Hypothetically speaking, of course.
Which was going to be my caveat, that to me that yet another, I don't think either Dan or I are in a position to speak for what an incoming administration might do. I would say, looking at the statements that the president-elect made on these issues during the course of the campaign, it would be safe to believe that he will want to do everything possible to preserve the viability of a two-state solution. Mm-hmm. And so if that is your starting point, then it's hard for me to imagine, even though I said I just wouldn't engage in hypotheticals, of picking up where, with respect to the Trump plan, with specifically where that left off, as opposed to looking at these issues through a prism of given where the situation has grown to, what can we do to preserve the viability of this option, which I fully appreciate many people think is fast receding, if it is not already receded.
Yeah, just to underscore the point, to be clear, that the Trump plan does not describe a two-state solution. It does use the term for the first time in the Trump administration, but it doesn't actually describe it in any meaningful content. It describes an end state of isolated islands of limited Palestinian autonomy surrounded by significant Israeli annexation in the West Bank. It's not something Palestinians will engage on. They, of course, weren't consulted on it and weren't involved in its drafting. That's not all that surprising. And so it's essentially not unimplementable. The only part that could have been implemented and nearly was the unilateral annexation part, which fortunately did not happen. So it's not consistent with what Mara just described as the notion of keeping the two-state solution alive and viable and as an option that can be pursued. I think once there's a team in place, of course, they can review all aspects of it. It's a long document. There's some regional aspects of it. There are some economic aspects of it. I don't know that what one would decide to do about every line of it, but the essence of what it describes as an end state is not a two-state solution, and so I think that's going to be very relevant to analyzing its relevance to a Biden administration's policy.
Thank you. Okay, the pounding is a little loud, so I'll speak louder now. This is from Rodi Kenda from Austria. What do you expect from the Biden administration for the Kurds? Do you think the Kurds of Syria, Iraq, and Turkey will be better off under Biden's presidency? Does the U.S. policy towards the Kurds would it be more consistent, given that in his August 2020 interview with the New York Times, Biden said that he would support the opposition in Turkey, including the pro-Kurdish HDP, to defeat Erdogan? How do you read this? Any takers?
Laura, you want
Yeah,
to take it?
I mean, I just as a general statement, I think that the entire approach to the United States diplomacy in the region, how to protect. I mean, this is an echo, and I appreciate that people are asking questions from everyone does from the perspective of where they sit. But if we look to the United States being back in the business of diplomacy, as Dan put it, looking to what the range of opportunities are, to the consistency of our message and our support, and to bringing others with us as we go forward. I think that whether it's the Kurds, for any particular group, that's a plus going forward. But it's to me a question of kind of process and approach, and aligning values with interests that will lead to a different path than the one that we've had.
Dan, do you have anything to add, or should I move on? Okay. The next question is from Eric Bordenkircher, who's actually a fellow at CMAD. As former Obama officials, what lessons have you learned from your experiences of engaging the Middle East? The failed multilateral interventions of Libya, the deepening Iranian presence in Iraq because of ISIS, the failed democratic process in Egypt, no headway in the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and the deterioration of relations with traditional regional allies. Have you be forced to reimagine policy and core assumptions about the region?
Well, as Mara said a moment ago, in different contexts, you don't start from zero, and I don't think anybody in 2021 will approach the region as it was in 2009 or 2013 or any stage during the Obama years. I think there were examples of successes in those years and examples of policies that were less successful. And one of the things that I think one also can conclude from that is that the United States is not necessarily, and often not at all, the determining factor in the course that events take in the region. Obviously, regional players are going to have a deep influence on their own region, on their own societies, on their own relationships with their neighbors. What the United States can do is organize broader diplomatic efforts of those within the region and bringing in outsiders. At times, broader security operations when that's called for. Provide assistance both of a financial and a political nature to support the actors who are acting consistent with our interests and values. And sometimes when we do those, we can solve some problems, or at least we can move them in a positive direction. Sometimes when we do that, we're running up against forces that we don't, or at least not at an acceptable cost, have the ability to fully steer in the way we might prefer. So there's a certain humility, of course, that I think is warranted. Looking at really any region, but the Middle East teaches humility, I think, to anybody who deals with it. So that's an important lesson. But it doesn't mean withdrawal. It doesn't mean lack of attention. It doesn't mean lack of effort. It doesn't mean walking away from partnerships. It may mean some changes in how they're conducted, and it may mean different approaches on diplomatic or security or societal and assistance types of relationships. But I think we have to be very mindful that we're not always able to be the determining factor.
Manny, you need to unmute.
I'm sorry. The next question is from Clarice from Austria. Europe is facing a new wave of Islamist attacks. Europeans are starting to agree that not jihadism, but Islamist ideology is a problem that needs tackling. What is President-elect Biden's position versus Islamism, violent and nonviolent? Mara?
Yeah, sorry, my quizzical look is because I'm actually not sure I understand the basis or the thrust of the question. But I would say in terms of, or the terminology necessarily used. So I would say that I would expect, again, looking from what he said during the course of the campaign and what his past record has been, that President-elect Biden is going to be eager to look at all the ways that we can counter extremism throughout the world, and where it comes from and what its sources are, and fully appreciating that for a number of European partners and friends, the extremist challenges they have been going through have certainly increased in recent years. So I think it's a holistic approach in terms of why and how and where it's coming from, what are routes to be able to either tackle or counter it, and where and for and what are the kind of broadest and deepest number of ways in which we can have an impact. We, the United States, can have an impact, again, working with friends and partners. But I just want to be clear that that goes to concerns about countering violent extremism writ large, which, in my experience, is not isolated to any particular religion or group, and sadly there are violent extremists in all parts of the spectrum, including, frankly, here in the United States, that we're grappling with.
And I don't want to speculate about a Biden administration approach. It's not something I think I'm able to do. But I will just say this: that there are obviously anybody from whatever ideology, whether it's Islamist ideology or whether it's any other ideology, that uses violence as a means of advancing their political goals is by definition illegitimate in having done so, and that needs to be resisted, and it needs to be addressed directly in a defensive way. It needs to be addressed in the programmatic ways that you can prevent people from falling under that mindset. Islamism does not have an equal sign next to violence, of course. In Tunisia, we've seen an Islamist party participate very successfully in Tunisia's emerging democratic process. So I think the label is less relevant than the style of politics or the behaviors or whether or not violence is part of the program. And the violence is what should be the disqualifying factor.
Thank you. Our next question is from Moha Inaji from Morocco. How will the Biden administration deal with trade with China, and what will it do about China's ambitions in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East? I know we addressed the latter half of the question earlier, but the first half, maybe we can do it a bit of a deep dive into it.
Well, Dan, do you want me to? Okay. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I come back to being strong at home to be stronger in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And China, to my mind, has had a plan, a strategy, an approach to achieving the status they have currently. It's certainly in economic terms, and where economic blurs into security terms. And so part of what the United States needs to do, and this is separate from what I think a Biden administration will do or won't do, because again, I think that's an important caveat, but certainly many people have written on this and spoken on it. And I think that the president-elect also at various points in his campaign has, though I think the issue probably has not come up quite as square in quite the ways that it was raised here, but is to improve a variety of ways in which we can be more competitive in the world, and in which we can, again, work with friends and partners to develop approaches that offer alternatives that, frankly, right now are not as clearly articulated and not as immediately available as they ought to be. And when I talk about alternatives, I mean that on the economic front, on means of communication, on just, as one example, on how 5G works, and where the options are for that kind of heightened degree of communications ability. And so I think there are a number of avenues in which the United States needs to, and hopefully will, do better at presenting alternatives domestically and with friends and partners. It is not specifically a trade question as I would see it. It is a broader question of improving the routes and the means for competition internationally that will help the United States do better, and in doing so also help our friends and partners do better in this regard and have more options.
I'm most familiar with this issue in the Israeli context, where indeed the United States, the Trump administration, has tried to discourage Israel from accepting certain kinds of Chinese investment in infrastructure and in high technologies and or sensitive technologies, or to become a market for those technologies. And this is a factor of the U.S. competition with China that I think is not particularly a partisan phenomenon in the United States. I think both parties recognize the global nature of U.S. competition with China, and that it has security dimensions, it has political dimensions, it has economic dimensions, it has technology dimensions. The notion of a total decoupling of the U.S. and Chinese economies does not seem like a smart idea, or even necessarily a possible idea. We're just simply too deeply intertwined, and so we have to find ways of working together on not just economic issues, there are global issues like climate change and non-proliferation that we should, and COVID that we should be working together on. But even on economic terms, the two economies are so deeply intertwined, we cannot fully pull apart. But there is some competition about who's going to really write the rules of the road of the new technologies, who's going to sort of design the networks, and we obviously want U.S. partners to stand with us and not allow sensitive technologies that we would not want to flow in toward China to do so, and to be mindful of how Chinese investments, which of course are going to continue. It's not that they disappear, but can affect security interests, theirs, our partners, and our own. So this is a dialogue that needs to be deepened. Israel is just one example. It's ongoing with our European partners and ongoing with really partners worldwide. And I think, as Mara alluded to, the more we are in a kind of a partnership with those other nations, the more we're providing alternatives. We're not just simply a scold saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you shouldn't reach these deals. We help make them part of the solution, which is a kind of an alliance of democracies and maybe some other emerging democracies that are working together and helping each other prosper, and also protecting our security, common security at the same time.
Thank you, Dan and Mara. The next question is from Iran Learman from Israel. Can you address the prospects for change in policy towards the Eastern Mediterranean, given Jim Jeffries' departure and the growing tensions with Erdogan? Who wants to tackle? Mara?
No, I'm just smiling because it's Dan's turn to go first.
Okay, Dan.
Again, here I'm really not speaking for a Biden. I'm not. At no point have I been speaking for a Biden transition or administration. It's all analytical. But here I have less knowledge, so it's more far more speculative. But look, Turkey is I think it's a conundrum in U.S. policy generally. Turkey is a member of NATO. Turkey is a country that hosts U.S. troops. Turkey is a country that obviously has a significant influence around the region, broadly defined, and is a significant economic player. And also, President Erdogan is a figure who has obviously done some very harmful things within Turkey about Turkey's own democratic processes, and has been aggressive toward neighbors in a number of ways. And at times has acted in ways that are not consistent with U.S. interests, certainly purchasing Russian air defenses and at times being very aggressive toward neighbors. So it's a conundrum. How one conducts that relationship, the Eastern Mediterranean is clearly one, not the only, but one theater in which that tension plays out. And we have United States has many other important partners: Israel, Cyprus, Greece, Egypt. We have certain things we do with Lebanon as well, although it's more limited, of course. You can't sort of ignore Turkey's role because they are obviously always going to be a player in that region. But if this is a region where their policies are more troubling and more challenging to the stability and prosperity that the United States has tried to, and I think will continue to try to promote, that's a very challenging problem. It's even a problem. It's even a challenge, I'd say, bureaucratically within the U.S. government. I know this from my service in the Obama administration, that addressing issues related to Turkey require people working together across seams within the policy process, Middle East and Europe and economic and military, that don't naturally always fit together or talk to each other, or certainly take different perspectives on the relationship based on the way they look at it. Russia, you can add Russia to that. So it's a very challenging relationship, and it's not one I've ever really worked on directly in a bilateral way. So I'm really not well equipped to go much deeper than that, and this isn't any way speculating. It's just to sort of describe the challenge.
Yeah, I would just add very briefly that because it does, agreeing with everything Dan said, because it involves dealing with these issues and the Eastern Mediterranean challenges as they are, it's hard to imagine a better example of needing to break down the silos. So both within our government in who works on it and how they work on it, as Dan pointed out, the divisions between military, the folks who do military stuff, the folks who do more economic stuff, and different regional interests. That's also reflected in all of the other countries that are involved as well, and the ways that they are organized. And so what I understanding it's a conundrum, where I take some more hope on a path going forward is having a president-elect who is skilled in bringing together people from across a variety of different parts of our government and other governments, and tackling challenges as they're posed. And so I think this is again a place where having a different kind of process internally, as well as with those throughout the world, is certainly the first step towards being able to get to different outcomes.
The next question is from Rory Reichert, who is a student at UCLA. How would you respond to the claim that the recent peace accords with the Gulf states and Sudan that Trump brokered, the Palestinian first paradigm, i.e. that there can be no separate peace process with the Arab world until the Palestinian issue is resolved, which the State Department and the peace industry adhered to for the past 50 years, up until Kerry is finally dead? I hope that made sense. But I think what he's trying to say is, in terms of the peace agreements between Bahrain and UAE and Sudan, were they brokered with the Palestinians in mind, and what does that mean for a Biden presidency? Will he adhere to that? From what I understand from his question.
So I guess the way I would interpret the elements of the question, and also what I think is the reality on the ground, is there are various pieces that led to these agreements going forward at this time. I would first harken back to what Dan and I said earlier, that these are that there is little that just happens out of whole cloth. That's not part of what the record that predecessors have left. So I would not view these agreements as necessarily a 180-degree turn from what had been policy in the past. I would say specifically that the UAE agreement, which was of course the first breaking glass on this approach, was at least in part, and I would say large part, gave an opportunity to stop the forward movement on the Israeli side on annexation. And so while it did not involve the Palestinian interests in terms of their direct participation, it did have a role in keeping bad things from worse things from happening, in the ways that I think we've discussed earlier, that moving forward with annexation, as the government of Israel seemed poised to do, or certainly was seriously considering, would have negated opportunities going forward for any kind of viable two-state option. And so the UAE agreement, which was the first of these series, was part of what turned the switch off, at least in the near term, on annexation. So I think that there are components of these agreements that can help things move forward. I think there's opportunity to build further on that with other countries in the region that may be considering as well, in some of the ways that Dan and I discussed earlier.
My next question is from Jock Werner from the Netherlands. What do you think Trump could do, either good or bad, in the region in the remaining months, either to help Israel or to make it more difficult for Biden?
Again, lots of speculation about things that might happen in the final 70 days of the Trump administration on this and other fronts. I don't really know what they may or may not do. I've again just read ideas of trying to sort of lock in the Trump plan. Some means there's really nothing that locks it in any serious way, and the new administration makes its own policies. But to try to create some documentation that would purport to do that. There's been speculation about things related to settlements, but again, the Trump administration is in its final days. It will do whatever it chooses to do in those days. It seems to be trying to apply some additional sanctions against Iran during this period. When the Biden administration takes office on January 20th, they essentially will start at that point to implement the Biden policies, and where there's continuum, and it's not that everything changes, obviously, that will continue. Where there's change, there will be change, and so we can speculate about it all we want, but I'm not sure it has broader significance than that.
Oops, thank you. The next question is from George Shadivarian from Lebanon. Lebanon is undergoing major crisis on multiple fronts. It has lately become apparent to a certain extent that the Trump administration isn't linking assistance packages to Lebanon to only reforms the other support group countries have, but are also trying to include weakening Hezbollah as a political condition for any help. Do you think the Biden administration would take the same approach, or would be more aligned with France and other European countries? Hypothetically speaking, of course. Mara, would you like? Oh, Dan.
Okay, I really don't want to speculate on it. I mean, I can just describe, long-standing U.S. policy, which is to support the Lebanese armed forces as a responsible actor that has accounted for the assistance the United States provided, and certainly is an actor that one can work with to deal with the threats that legitimate threats Lebanon faces from at one time it was Al Qaeda, more recently it's ISIS, other spillover from Syria, and it's also been a long-standing U.S. policy to treat Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, not to distinguish between its military and its political wings, not to deal with the members of the organization that serve in these in the Lebanese government, and so those have been the foundations. But again, there's some, a lot of continuity from Bush to Obama to Trump on those aspects of the policy. I'm not really going to speculate with going forward.
Mara, would you like to add anything?
No, I actually don't think I have anything more to add to what Dan said.
Okay. Let's see. They're coming in fast and furious. You guys are super popular today. This is from Ersin from Turkey. Mr. Biden has an article in the Foreign Affairs where he argues that the U.S. will end the forever wars and pull vast numbers of troops from the Middle East. What does this mean for Iraq and Syria?
So that the Foreign Affairs article that's being referenced, I don't think that those are quotes from the article. I think that the question is kind of what the United States positioning is in the region, and Dan referenced this earlier, that I believe the United States will continue to remain significantly engaged, will become more engaged diplomatically in a variety of ways that we have discussed here, and that the United States commitment to the Middle East and to the importance of relationships there and working there and assistance and of various forms, there is continuity to that across administrations. And I think that is a different question than people, for example, comparing like the highest troop numbers that we had at any given point on the ground in the region versus what those troop numbers may be now, and equating that with the degree of U.S. commitment. That is, and of U.S. interest in ongoing relationships and methods of operating. So I think that there's a false dichotomy there. and the importance and interests of the region, and how we best deal in the world as it is with the kinds of concerns we have and have raised earlier about China and Russia, I think are reflected in what the United States' overall posture is. It doesn't serve our global interests for the United States to withdraw from the world or withdraw from the region. And that's just not something that is going to happen.
Yeah, it's been quite a chaotic 4 years, to say the least. The next question is from Alan Meyer from the United States. And I know we touched upon this earlier, but I'd like to ask it again. How do you expect President Biden to approach relations with Saudi Arabia in general and with MBS in particular? Dan?
Well, I think, he spoke to this on a couple of occasions during the campaign about, recognizing that the U.S.-Saudi relationship has, of course, a lot of history, and it serves various common interests in terms of energy, in terms of regional security. But it's also in need of a reassessment, and that aspects of the way it's been conducted in the Trump years, with a sort of a blank check given to Saudi actions that have not served U.S. interests, such as pursuing a war in Yemen with really total disregard for the casualties, the civilian casualties that have resulted. I think earlier the dispute with Qatar was mentioned. There were some episodes regarding the Lebanese prime minister a couple of years ago. There is the very harsh treatment of human rights, particularly women's rights activists at home, and there's of course the Khashoggi murder. And those are all things that the Trump administration has largely sort of ignored and continued about this kind of very transactional relationship that we described earlier. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, is somebody who is, in some respects, modernizing the society. It's more open, and there's modern entertainment, and women are driving and entering the workplace in various respects. He has at least aspirations to diversify the economy. It's certainly possible to read the normalization agreements with the UAE and Bahrain having, some resulting in part from, his outlook on the region and the common interest that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have with Israel. By the way, I think that touches on a lot of what's a bit different. It was an earlier question, but the previous king of Saudi Arabia was the author of the Arab Peace Initiative, which set up the sequence of first a two-state solution, then normalization. So as long as he was alive, I think it was unrealistic to see that sequence abandoned. But maybe MBS represents a generation that is looking at some of these things differently. So there are some opportunities with this kind of generational change of leadership, but there's also, as I mentioned, some serious concerns about the way the relationship's been conducted and the way U.S. interests have been affected by it. And that is in need of a reassessment. When you start a reassessment, you aren't dictating the outcome of that reassessment, what it means, what will change, how things will change, how things will be done differently. But that's at least the starting point.
God, Mara, anything to add? No? Okay, so we have, let's see, it's 12:20, and I have just a few more questions for you because I believe that a lot of the questions are redundant or have been responded to in one form or another. The next question is from Charlotta Spade from Sweden. It would be interesting to hear the speaker's assessment on the incoming administration's expected policy regarding human rights dialogue in the region and the prospects for renewed engagement on democracy. Mara?
Sure. Well, I feel like we may have covered this earlier in at least the way that I look at it is that I fully expect the incoming administration to have a improved approach to democracy at home. And so what that conveys to the rest of the world and how we act with the rest of the world, I think will be built upon the shifts in demeanor and approach and how we treat our citizens here at home and the many people that live here in the United States, and then how we deal with others throughout the world, including in the Middle East. I think it puts us on more stable ground to be able to have these discussions with other countries when we're doing better here at home. And so that is a shift I would expect.
I agree with you completely. Dan? No? Okay. This is from Shahram Azmudeh from Iran. Do you think and it's it's actually two different questions. The first one is, do you think a Biden administration will attempt to withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan? And then the second question is, do you think the Biden administration will be inclined to seek a grand bargain with Iran or simply return to the status quo?
I'm not an expert on Afghanistan policy. I would make two observations about the question. One is that ensuring Afghanistan is stable and does not become a renewed source of terrorism. Obviously, that the Afghan people are able to live freely and not live under oppressive and terroristic rule, but also that it not be a source of attacks externally to the United States, to other allies and partners is critical. And so, if there's an ongoing role for the United States to help keep those conditions in place, that's obviously something that needs to be considered. At the same time, the war in Afghanistan is now in, I think it's 19th year. There are U.S. soldiers serving in Afghanistan who were not born on 9/11, which was the event that triggered the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. And so I think there's a strong desire, I'm talking about sort of on behalf of the American people, this isn't really a comment about administration policy, to find a way to bring that chapter to a conclusion. But is there some ongoing way that the U.S. can be a partner in ensuring a certain kind of stability? That's obviously the challenge and something that's going to be looked at. And with respect to Iran, again, I think we discussed it earlier. No illusions, I think, on anybody's part about the challenges with the current Iranian regime, with its actions in the region, with its attitude towards its neighbors, with its attitude towards the United States, with its sponsorship of terrorism, with its pursuit of nuclear weapons, or at least preserving that option. And so those challenges have to be dealt with. And the way we described earlier, I don't think we need to go into all the detail again, of ensuring Iran will never get a nuclear weapon, but and also addressing its regional role, and doing that in a way that is changes some of those actions and behaviors in a way that's better for us and better for the region, better for certain Iran's neighbors, but also includes those neighbors in that dialogue. That's going to be hard to structure, and it's going to be so hard to run those two kinds of things in parallel. But that's the challenge.
Thank you. Okay, it's 12:25. My team is saying, so we'll wind down with an easy-ish question. Do you expect the travel ban to be lifted once Biden is in office?
So I actually believe that he has made statements to this in this regard. I'm now not sure whether it's just the media speculation that I've read or actual statements he's made. But I believe that he certainly has made statements about looking at the full range of executive actions that are available to him, many of which there are many of those in the immigration space, which would include addressing the travel ban in ways that, again, respect U.S. interests and values. And I think that is one of the places where you will see a consistency of approach with the new administration. And there's a whole bucket of issues related to how we deal with those who come to the United States, visit, and or have asylum needs that I think you will see going forward. I think it's fair to expect a much better alignment of our values and our interests, and a number of those actions that are possible. When I say by executive action, things that you can do absent Congress, and there's also obviously legislative, room for legislative discussion on other things.
Dan, would you like to tackle it?
Well, I'd just say that there's a lot of ways that the Iranian people deserve the support of the United States and of others in dealing with a regime that treats them terribly. We don't need to go into all of the ways that can take place. But one of them, I think, certainly is a lifting of a travel restriction on Iranians. That seems to be exactly opposite to what one would do if one wanted to show support for the Iranian people and make even some distinction between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. That's been, I think, one of the. Of course, the travel ban has a lot of other ugly aspects to it, but just in the way it affects the U.S. Reputation and positioning vis-a-vis the Iranian people, who may be our ally, and certainly we should be sympathetic to vis-a-vis the regime, who clearly we have a lot of very serious problems with. I think it's a big mistake. You're muted, Mike.
I'm really bad at this. I'm so sorry. But I think we've come to the end. I want to thank both of you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and answering these questions from our participants from all over the world. We had people from Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Saudi, Nigeria. It's pretty fantastic. And on behalf of the CIMA team and Steve Spiegel and myself, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and just know that our sponsors, of course, the recording of this webinar will be on YouTube and on our website within the next 24 hours. Thank you again, Dan and Mara, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.